What is up, DS3 TV? We are back for another video. This one is another history summarized by Overly Sarcastic Productions, and this one is Alexander the Great. We know a lot about Alexander the Great anyway, but you know, thought to get some more perspective from Overly Sarcastic Productions, and yeah, let's get into it. Also subscribe to the channel. I want to get 1,000 subscribers by my birthday, September 13th. And yeah, let's get into the video. Also, you can put videos that you want me to react to in the comment section down below, and I will react to them. And yeah, let's get into it and play.
Century following the Peloponnesian War, Greece wasn't really doing so hot. Athens' once mighty maritime empire had been rendered moot, and its continued relevance was primarily, if not entirely, owed to its lasting dedication to culture, art, and philosophy. Sparta's population, which was never all that large in the first place, steadily dwindled through the 4th century as its military similarly deteriorated. Thebes, who has a particularly humorous episode in the 4th century that I've covered elsewhere, had scarcely a decade of military dominance to its name. Greece was effectively the passed-out drunk guy on a couch at a house party, and their forehead was tempting any and all would-be knob artists to uncap their finest permanent markers and start scribbling. It wasn't long before Philip II of Macedon hoisted his proverbial marker and began drawing plans. For a little background, Philip spent most of his childhood in Thebes during the time of the awesome general Epaminondas. While there, he learned a few things that would become absolutely invaluable to his subsequent military success. First, he learned the importance of using specific units of elite troops, which was pretty much unheard of in the Greek world. He also learned how effective it could be to concentrate effort on a specific part of an enemy's line in order to disrupt and/or break them. For those of you familiar with Thebes' famous sacred band, this is textbook Theban tactics. Two of Philip's big innovations were the oblique attack, which we'll see more of later, and his integration of companion cavalry, which, given Philip is Greek for lover of horses, checks out. Lastly, Philip gave his soldiers a cartoonishly long 20-foot lance called the sarissa. Look at this thing, it's nuts!
Yeah, those really probably did help more so, because yeah, you weren't getting past that.
So, conquest time. He began by swiping up Thessaly, and then a decade later he took the entirety of Thrace. That was a rather bold move, but he ultimately didn't have all that much trouble in pulling it off. With all of northern Greece under his wing by 342, which already should have been setting off some serious alarm bells, but apparently didn't because screw that, that's effort, Philip proceeded to push down into central Greece. I should say, the famous Athenian orator Demosthenes made several impassioned speeches urging the assembly to take some precaution against the seemingly unimpeded Macedonian advance.
Nah. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? He could have a son that could control all of the known world.
But again, being passed out on a couch doesn't exactly lend itself well to a coordinated military defense of one's homeland against as skilled a tactician as Philip. It wasn't until 338, when Philip had reached Boeotia, that Athens, Thebes, and friends realized that they had a serious problem on their hands. And by then, it was way too late. The last battle in Philip's conquest of Greece was fought at Chaeronea, and it's a fantastic example of just how clever and innovative Philip was. On the defending side, Athens held the left, while Thebes and their famous sacred band held the right. Philip's strategy was predicated on the astute assessment that the Athenians are lousy hoplites, mostly because they're a bunch of philosophical nerds. As such, he placed his best soldiers on the left to meet the Thebans, under the command of his young son, Alexander the soon-to-be great, who at the time was just 18. And this next bit was especially tricksy. As I've described in this video here about ancient warfare, the general way of hoplite combat was for both lines to meet head-on, but Philip had Alexander the Oblique advance on an angle, refusing the left flank entirely. That way the Macedonians wouldn't have to actually fight the very skilled Thebans directly, and the plan worked brilliantly. Philip broke the Athenians and split the defending line, and then Alexander the Swell charged his cavalry through, surrounding the Thebans and killing them all. And recall, Philip knew these guys. He had lived in Thebes, and these soldiers were his childhood friends. So that's really brutal. That said, Philip was no fool. He knew what he did, and he explicitly said of the Thebans, "Let no one say that what these men did was dishonorable." And with that, the proverbial knob was drawn and Greece was his. Well, not all of Greece. Sparta was so weak and irrelevant that Macedon never actually bothered conquering it. Which, considering Sparta's collective attitude towards weakness in all of its forms, must have stung something fierce. So, almost all of Greece. In 336, Philip died and Alexander the Shiny anew stepped in to rule Greece, although perhaps unsurprisingly, his ascension wasn't without incident. Many people saw this as an opportunity to revolt, and Alexander the suddenly preoccupied spent 2 years suppressing them. In many cases, he quieted revolts by leading his army into an open field and simply having them do marching drills in various formations and directions, generally showing off how disciplined they were as a fighting force. For the most part, the revolting parties put down their pitchforks at first sight of just how legit Alexander the Legit's army was. This is the only instance I'm aware of in which an armed revolt was suppressed by a marching band routine. And speaking of Alexander the Passible's army...
I will say, if you can scare common people, usually... Because it's more so mind games that I'm more surprised that he like knew the mind games to play, but he was definitely always very smart. So he knew that, hey, I don't have to like, if I don't really have to like use my military, I'm probably not going to. So I'm just gonna, you know, play along like we're doing a little play or whatever, and hopefully they get scared by that. And yeah, they did. So.
He made some notable improvements on his father's work. His army was composed of many different types of units, and he organized his battle lines by their degrees of flexibility. The slowest, most heavily armed units were in the center, and he put the lighter and faster units towards the outside edge of his line. The idea was to keep his lines supple and pivot on joints between units, so he could refuse and engage different parts of his line on a dime. And remember, his army is composed of light and heavy cavalry, light and heavy infantry, archers, slingers, you name it. This was an army unlike anything Greece had ever seen before. And speaking of, a lot of Greeks took issue with the Macedonians calling themselves Greek. To places like Athens, Thebes, and Sparta, Macedon was way north and a little weird. Sure, the Macedonians competed in the Olympics, so they had that going for them, but they could never shake this reputation for being off-brand Greeks. So, with Greece consolidated, Alexander with the good hair decided that he absolutely totally needed to invade Persia because... I don't actually know. According to the man himself, it was revenge for the Persian Wars 150 years before, which, for several reasons, is incredibly flimsy, but whatever the case, he crossed the Hellespont and got to work. His first big encounter came at the Battle of the Granicus River, where, incidentally, he was almost killed. There's definitely something to be said for how much of a morale boost a general gives when he fights in the front lines, but there are other things to be said for how potentially insanely disastrous that can be. Following the battle, Alexander the Thorough pursued the strategy of, I want every single Persian port on the Mediterranean flying a Greek flag, or so help me Zeus, I will set the ocean on fire. And he did. The strategy thing, not the ocean fire thing. That didn't happen. And that'd be incredibly difficult logistically. Anyway, this gave him a little bit of trouble later on, but it was a brilliant call overall. He didn't leave anything to chance, and he didn't ever want to be snuck up on from behind. Moving on, the next famous battle happened when the Persians snuck up on him from behind. Damn it. At the Battle of Issus, the Persian king Darius himself arrived to deliver what he imagined would be a crushing defeat. The danger was that Alexander the All-Right was advancing southward into the Levant, but Darius came from the north, which meant that the Macedonian line was mirrored from what it was supposed to be, so Alexander the Adaptable had to do a lot of thinking on the fly to pull out a win. Much as was the case at Granicus, the Greek cavalry was the MVP. They managed to rout Darius himself and defeat his army. And the problem was that since Darius was so sure of his chances, he brought his family along with him to watch his assumed triumph. So when things didn't quite go to plan, his enemy suddenly had his wife and children as hostages. Whoops. After this,
that was dumb.
Darius knew that he was in dire straits, and he sent Alexander the hostage-taker a message. Hey, buddy, I see that you're cleaning up shop with my empire. I'm not thrilled, but I'm certainly impressed, so I'm willing to cut you a deal, you know, king to king. You take everything west of the Euphrates River, and we'll call it even. How's that sound? Alexander the Hamilton's trusted commander Parmenion advised him, if I were Alexander, I'd take that offer. To which he replied, if I were Parmenion, so would I. Damn, Xander, chill. Anyway, in his letter back to Darius, Alexander the Flammable said words to the effect of, how dare you address me as your equal and try to cut a deal? Oh. You are to approach me as the lord of all Asia. Fight me, pleb. So Alexander...
So yeah, he was... Yeah, at this point, he was working on world domination. It was... it was no point in talking to him like an equal at this point.
The alright carried along his merry way, sweeping up Levantine ports left and right in keeping with the strategy of I want all of it up until he gets to the island port of Tyre. Now, Tyre argued that they were within their rights to pull a Switzerland on this one and stay neutral, but Alexander the Insistent said, no, not so fast. Either I own you or I kill you, so take a pick. They picked screw you, so Alexander the thoroughly miffed started building a land bridge to the island to besiege it. Tyre destroyed the bridge, so Alexander the Persistent built another, wider one with siege engines on it. He also launched ships that had siege engines on them, because why not? Dude loved his crazy engineers. So Tyre put huge stones in the water to block the siege ships, but then he sent out ships with cranes on them to move the stones to make way for the ships with siege engines on them to go in and wreck shop. It was ridiculous, and the whole thing took like 8 friggin' months, and by the time Alexander the Absolutely Flawless finally broke through, he was furious. During his campaign, he made a point to avoid raping or pillaging and showed much respect for the people whom he conquered. But this was pretty much the big bloody exception.
Because he was absolutely pissed at somebody that they tried that hard to get away from him, and he knew that, like, basically he knew that he was gonna, like, everybody knew that if they actually got to Tyre, he would have, like, taken it over. And Tyre knew that too, probably. That's why they kept breaking the bridge. So, yeah, I could definitely see why he would be pissed.
Upon entering the city, he killed 10,000 men and enslaved 30,000 others. Yikes. That is very comprehensive. After Tyre, Alexander the Adventuresome swooped down into Egypt to clean up the last of Darius's western holdings. The Egyptians, who never much cared for the Persians in the first place after a little bit of sacred bull stabbing by the Persian king Cambyses, welcomed their new Macedonian overlords with open arms and crowned Alexander the Overhyped as Pharaoh of Egypt. Now, you may rightly be wondering how exactly a Greek general can be a Greek general, the lord of all Asia, and a pharaoh of Egypt. And honestly, so was the Macedonian army. People were getting a little antsy about the tightrope he was walking. Greeks didn't like kings, but here was Alexander the Regal explicitly acting like one. In his lifetime, he didn't encounter any major crises or anything like that, but as time went on, it became increasingly clear that he couldn't be everything to everyone. However, he did his damnedest to govern the various cultures in his new empire respectfully. For all of Alexander the Feisty's hatred of Persia, he took a page right out of their book by treating his subjects so respectfully. Athens certainly didn't do that for their empire. Besides government, Alexander the Good Boy was very attentive to religious matters and how he presented himself. Back when he was in Anatolia, he diverted to the famous Gordian knot, as it was said that he who could undo the knot would go on to rule all of Asia. Whether the story goes that he pulls out the pin holding the knot or straight up cuts it in half, the fact remains that he wouldn't dare let such a perfect PR moment go to waste. Anyway, when he was in Egypt, he went out of his way to visit the oracle of the Siwa Oasis in the desert. So out of his way, in fact, that the army he took with him almost got lost in said desert. Fortunately, they didn't, and Alexander, the is coarse and rough and irritating and gets everywhere, did meet with the oracle. And apparently, the oracle told him that he was actually the son of Zeus. What a twist!
What a twist, and definitely another good morale boost for him.
This was more fantastic PR for Alexander the demigod, but some of his army said, son of Zeus? Really? Come on, dude, we knew Philip. But suspicious soldiers aside, Alexander the Underwood was playing the politics rather well, both for the benefit of himself and his blooming empire. With the entire eastern Mediterranean squared away, Alexander the not done yet turned his attention back to the heartland of Persia, and met Darius for the super epic ultimate showdown of ultimate destiny at the Battle of Gaugamela. So before the battle, Alexander the Elfide put his reconnaissance team into overdrive. In general, the Macedonians had fantastic recon by the standards of the time, partly because Alexander the Ample wasn't afraid to split up his army, having fast stuff like cavalry go off really quickly while the lame, slow human people waddled along their merry way. But back to recon, the 3 questions were always, where are they, how many of them are there, and what are they doing? In advance of Gaugamela, the answers were, Gaugamela, about 100,000-ish, and they're planning to envelop you. Then Alexander the Tactically Gifted proceeded to draw his battle plan specifically around being enveloped. Cue the dramatic music.
I like the slight nod to his own, to the music, to the editor's own music in here. I like the slight nod to it.
The Macedonian line, turning it up to 11 on the extremometer, refused both the left and the right flanks, and the javelineers and archers cleaned up against the Persian chariots when they tried to close in. But then, just as the Greek center put Darius to flight, again, I might add, the Persians broke through Alexander the Decent's line and started giving his left flank some serious problems. Now, Alexander the Alexandrist had a choice on his hands. If he chased Darius, he could kill him instantly and finally claim all of Persia for himself, but if he didn't support his left flank, there's a chance Persia could crush his entire army right there. Fortunately, good judgment prevailed and Alexander the A-OK returned to his line to stop his army from getting unceremoniously murderized. Darius survived, yeah, but the battle was won. By this point, the writing was on the wall, or on the forehead, I guess if we're going back to that knob metaphor thing, and more Persian satraps, governors basically, capitulated to Macedon. Also, as for the whole Darius loose end thing, while Alexander the Eastbound had been chasing the poor guy all over Persia, one satrap, Bessus, betrayed Darius and assassinated him. Alexander the blandly named was outraged for having his kill yoinked, but given that he now owned most of Persia and riches beyond what any Greek could even imagine, I'd venture to say he probably wasn't too torn up about it. Not content to leave well enough alone, he pushed east because why not? The Macedonians made it well into the Indus Valley before his army said, okay, Alex, buddy, we've been at this for like 6 straight years, can we please go home now? And Alexander the sculpt me pretty or I'll kill you said, ugh, fine, but after we go home, we're going to circumnavigate Africa. Okay? Deal? Cool? Cool? Alright.
Oh, that was actually his next plan? Oh, wow. Yeah, he was gonna, he was really gonna, like, take over the whole world. This was not gonna stop. I mean, you know, crazy he died, like, on the way back, basically, but yeah.
Let's go. By this point, Alexander the looking more Persian by the day had taken a Persian wife and married off 90 of his generals to Persian wives as well. He was also making people bow before him, which kind of weirded out the Greeks a little bit because, again, not the biggest fans of kings. To wrap up, Alexander the still basically kind of a teenager led his army back through southern Persia, casually losing most of it, and posted up in Babylon for some post-campaign festivities, whereupon he proceeded to die of either a fever, alcohol poisoning, or poisoning. Jury's out on that one. Now, Alexander the Dead left a stupidly big empire behind him, and remember how there was all kinds of pitchforky, revolty business when Philip died? Well, second verse same as the first, the empire was up for grabs. The difference was that there wasn't even an obvious successor this time, and in the ensuing free-for-all, the empire split up into a billion different pieces owned by various Macedonian generals. The ones who we especially care about are Ptolemy, who took over Egypt, and Seleucus, whose empire spanned much of the old Persian Empire. The Seleucid Empire reached from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley and briefly poked up into Anatolia, but mostly just decayed until it occupied little more than the Levant. If you want to learn more, I encourage you to first listen to me lose my mind in this podcast about the horrendous Ptolemaic family tree, and just in general, pick up a book and start reading some fun stuff about the Hellenistic world. I will say, it is a rather entertaining period of history, but it is also an absolute mess to keep track of, with honestly not a whole lot of super consequential stuff going on. Most people just acknowledge that it exists and then immediately jump over to the Roman Punic Wars, which were going on at the same time and were objectively much more eventful. To grossly oversimplify, the Hellenistic period was a right mess, with civil wars, squabbling over power, and all sorts of faffing about until Rome steamrolled them all into the Republic. And since I've got nowhere to go for the next minute or so, I'll give my 2 drachmas on this whole the great business. Gordon Ramsay would be outraged because it is just so bland. What kind of name is that? Read any page out of Homer and it's jam-packed with specific and evocative epithets to describe people. Each character has no less than 5 apiece, so it's inexcusable that Alexander, arguably the most consequential Greek who ever lived, has one lame title. Now, if I had my way with history, I'd give him a much more interesting and informative name. In Greek, something like Alexander Promachos or Alexander Aristos would instantly be a step above.
Yeah, that actually does make more sense. I feel like the second one is better than the first. You tell me in the comment section what you think, but yeah. I would say the second one is better than the first, Alexander the Excellent. Yeah, because that actually is really, really good. But, Yeah, I kind of agree that you could have had a better name, like a better sounding name.
Above his Greek title of Megas, big. That's just dull. In English, even something as simple as Alexander the Conqueror or Alexander the Horseman are a step up, because they're at least a little more specific to him. Anything is better than the Great. It's an example of what's so wrong with our abuse of hyperbole. A name that's supposed to mean everything ends up meaning absolutely nothing. Anyway, that's my spiel. I hope you had a great time learning about Alexander the... Damn it. Great.
Well, that was a pretty good video, and yeah. Talk to you guys in the next video, and subscribe to the channel. I want to get 1,000 subscribers by my birthday, September 13th. And yeah, talk to you guys in the next video, and peace.